All right, so today we're doing the anamorphic deep dive. We're going to be talking about what is an anamorphic lens, what you need to know to shoot with anamorphic lenses, differences in lenses, and I don't really know what I'm talking about. So we have Dan and Forrest, founders of Atlas Lens Co.
Thanks for having us on, Gene.
Yeah, thank you.
We'll add in like extra claps so it doesn't sound lame, just one person clapping. Woo! Lights flashing. You guys want lights flashing and some bass? Some confetti flying.
Yeah.
Party rock is in the house.
So I'll go ahead and pull up a few clips that we can look at. There's an anamorphic look that it has, and it's one of those things that's a bit hard to describe, but I figured you guys have tried to describe it to a lot of different people.
One of the key things is your aspect ratio.
So we're getting a wider field of view, that ultra wide screen. You're not just letterboxing it and just slicing off the top and bottom here.
Exactly.
You're actually capturing a really wide image. I think a lot of people, when they think of anamorphic lenses, they think of those flares. But what's interesting is you want a certain amount of control over that flare, right? For example, this shot, if this was a lens that flared like crazy, then it's almost like the whole shot would have like a blue hue to it almost.
In the 1950s, nobody wanted flare.
Technically speaking, you would want to see zero flare because that means practically all the light is getting through. There's nothing being reflected and bouncing around. That's never practical. It doesn't exist, so there's always a level of reflectance, so it is a bit of a choice. The way that the background is blurring has this sort of painterly quality, and it's going in the vertical direction.
Sort of that astigmatic background. So astigmatism is just a difference between vertical focus and horizontal focus.
I'll go ahead and play the show reels that you guys have. Like here you have a lot of flare because the headlight is beaming straight into the lens, so that's where we want a flare. But out here it looks like there's a lot of lighting effects going on, but the flares seem to be pretty controlled.
I could speak detailed about this one because I shot that scene.
This scene here?
Yeah, this is from a music video with will.i.am from Black Eyed Peas and J. Ray. We're using a volumetric LED backdrop there. So one of the great things is that the LEDs aren't flaring, but the headlight is flaring. So I'd say that's part of our optical design and the coatings that we use that flare when a light intensity passes a certain threshold. So it's kind of a balancing act between flare that you do want because it's classic and flare that you don't want because it would just generally wash the scene or make it kind of muddy.
And then we come here, we have tons of flares. And I noticed you actually have to spike the lens decently to get that flare going. So these are all intentional flares for that Star Trek effect, right? The J.J. Abrams effect.
For those who don't know, the Orion series, that's our first family of lenses. And those have the cyan blue, traditional, what we think of Panavision C series. That's one of our favorite anamorphic lens. And the flares from those are typically that kind of light cyan blue. In 2020 summer, we came out with a special edition version of the Orion called the Silver Edition.
So this is the Orion, and then this is the Silver Edition, which you can tell because of that white strip right there.
The Silver Edition have a more neutral flare characteristic, so they'll take on almost entirely the spectra of the light source that's hitting them. So yeah, that's another one we did. So that's J. Ray from Black Eyed Peas. We had the Silver Edition, I think it was a 40 on, and we're using a little Leica light off frame to just ping with a little bit of golden light.
This is definitely not the Silver Edition then, because we're getting this orange light, but still a blue flare.
Yep.
If this was the Silver Edition, would this streak here also be pretty orange?
Yeah, it would be probably broken up with what I like to call bubbles. So there's like separated flares, and it would be probably more golden like the light source.
You kind of mentioned these are what, bubble?
Yeah, when they break up, I call them bubbles.
Bubbles.
Bubble flare.
Bubble flares. All right, I like that.
I don't know if that'll stick, but hashtag bubble flares.
With the focus rack, there's a little bit of compression changing in the background in a way.
Right, yeah, anamorphic breathing.
Lens breathing is a change in field of view or angle of view depending on the focus position of the lens. So if you're focused close, it could mean that your field of view is wider, or it could mean that it's tighter. It depends on the lens design.
Feels different from a normal lens with focus breathing,
It's
right?
disproportionate because when the scene is in focus or an object is in focus, its proportions are correct as we know them, right? Like a circle will be a circle. But when you put that object out of focus, it's becoming an oval. One of my favorite out of focus elements is seeing trees and vegetation. It has a unique quality that is just really fun to look at when it's anamorphic.
What do you call this right here, where you get a little bit of this almost rainbow effect?
We like to call that a God's eye flare.
It's interesting because a good anamorphic lens feels soft but sharp at the same time. The things that are in focus, nice and sharp, and then you get the background which has like that delicious background blur.
Something to savor.
Yeah.
And especially you'll see those kind of God's eye flares on vintage spherical lenses a lot. Modern lenses often are engineered in such a way that imperfections are meant to be invisible, but with our lens design philosophy, we sought to embrace some of the characteristics of vintage lenses that are not perfect. And that's something we really love. Perfection of the imperfection. Coma literally means like a streaking or like a changing of shape. So the pupil is shaped like an oval from being an anamorphic lens, but as you get out towards the edges, coma is where that starts to even break up a little bit in the out of focus areas.
This is an interesting
cool.
flare here. What do you call this where it's the opposite corner?
We call those secondaries usually, or
Oh,
that's my term, secondary flare. That's bouncing around most likely in the spherical group of the lens, and like if you just have a Minolta lens, you might get that too.
Okay, so this is something that I see when it's in motion, especially with a wider anamorphic, is the apparent perspective of the room. You get a sense of how close something is to the camera and how far away the background is, because in order to get such a wide angle field of view, you would have to grab a spherical lens that's half the focal length or double the field of view. But with that, you get unwanted characteristics of putting a wide angle right up in someone's face. You get sort of their face starts to look bulgy, and then you go, well, that doesn't match how my eye sees people. I feel like it matches the way we see the world a lot better in that sense.
Your lenses are out there, working hard, huh?
It's exciting to see them adopted at all levels of filmmaking because, you know, one of our missions here is no matter where you are in your career that you can have access to anamorphic cinematography. It's also great to see them adopted at the highest levels of professional filmmaking. We're super excited about Babylon, which is going to come out in just a week or so.
What, next week or so?
Yeah, it's coming out December 23rd.
Was the shot on the Orions?
Yes, actually.
All Orion. There's that perspective thing when the car flying by.
That must have been a wide angle.
It feels like you're right there, like
Yeah.
you're about to get hit with it.
I think that was the 25.
Yeah.
So
And these Orions are so good for that vintage look.
these ones are extra special even because Forrest actually did some custom modifications that Linus requested.
Is it crazy to have a lens company that just started up not that long ago relative to everybody else who's been around for hundreds of years and then in theaters now?
It's unbelievable. I mean, when we were working on the lenses, I was watching La La Land, and that was all the shots in that film are exactly the things that like inspired me. And so to have Linus come and use these lenses is just, I still don't really comprehend it that it happened.
Very cool. Excited to see that in theaters. Babylon, shot on Orions. Before you shoot anamorphic, the basic concept is the image is squeezed onto the sensor. So one, you want to be able to monitor it de-squeezed. A lot of monitors have a de-squeeze option, or some higher end cameras have de-squeeze options. Even like the Panasonic GH6 has a de-squeeze option in the mirrorless camera itself. And then you go into post-production and then you de-squeeze it. So the most common type of squeeze is a 2x squeeze. So if you have an open gate mode on like Alexa where you're recording the whole sensor, then you can stretch that out 2x and get that ultra wide angle. Is it 235 by 9 or 239 by 1?
Super question. It actually is both. They had a film negative that was 4perf with a 4:3 aspect ratio, right? And then with a 2 times anamorphic lens, that comes out to 8:3, which mathematically is 2.66 to 1. But then when they deliver the film for projection, you need to have your sound somewhere. So often they would either have optical sound, which is like little squiggly lines that would be picked up by a little sensor, or you'd have mag sound, which is like a traditional magnetic tape that stripes onto the film. And so that takes up space on that piece of film and mats the film down optically. So they would mat down from 2.66 to 1 to 2.39 or 2.40 to 1, and then sometimes 2.35 to 1, depending on the sound format.
The 2x is traditional, right? But then the new Mercuries are 1.5x. If you take that and put it on a 16:9 sensor like, I don't know, the Sony A7, that's the same exact ratio as a 2x on a 4:3. There's nothing stopping you from putting a 2x anamorphic on a 16:9, but then you just end up with, what is that, 32:9? So that's just like, I don't know, you're looking at
You're
a
looking
pool
through
noodle or something.
It's like 3.5.
Focal lengths, when it comes to anamorphic, this is a 40 mil on an anamorphic. So what's that mean when you compare it to a spherical 40 mil?
The vertical field of view will be 40 millimeters, so that what the focal length says will be your approximate angle of view. And then horizontally, you just want to divide your focal length by your anamorphic coefficient. So since the Orion series are 2 times, you would just say, okay, let's divide that 40 by 2. That's around a 20. So it's around a 20 millimeter spherical horizontal angle of view equivalent.
And if you are shooting with spherical lenses and you are planning on delivering in an ultra wide format, then it's actually quite a bit wider, because instead of actually trimming off the top and bottom, you just get 2 times or 1.5 times more on the sides.
Right.
Okay, so then the Orions are for Super 35 sensors, but there's also the LF extender.
The lenses are designed to cover 4x film or Super 35. With this accessory, you can make all of the Orion series lenses cover edge to edge on full frame or LF or VistaVision sensors. So you get an expanded image circle and coverage. And then the other benefit of this is that if you're using a Super 35 camera with this accessory, you can turn your 100 millimeter into a 160 millimeter. So it gives you magnification and expansion, and it turns your 80 into a 127 millimeter equivalent focal length. And it has a 1 1/3 stop of light loss, which is not that bad in today's era where your sensors are 800 or 1600 base ISO.
So you basically take that and put that in between this lens and the camera.
This is like old Spike Jonze style.
It's PL to PL.
Yeah, it's PL to PL, and this will work with a lot of different other lenses that are not Atlas lenses, but it's optimized for Atlas lenses. So it's really a great accessory. And then you can see my face there.
So focal length wise, it's about a 1.6x. So this 50 is now like an 85.
Full frame sensor is about 1.6 times larger than a Super 35 sensor. And so your field of view or angle of view equivalency should be about the same.
My focus marks change at all when I do this?
No, that's one of the benefits of the LF extender. Your focus marks won't change. You also don't lose your minimum focus. So with the 100 and adding it, you still have a 3-foot minimum focus on the 100 mil. So you have a 160 millimeter anamorphic lens now with a 3-foot close focus. Forrest and I started working on Atlas in early 2016 in stealth.
At the beginning, it was just, these are the lenses we want to bring to ourselves. And so it's a very personal thing always, and it still is today.
Do you guys ever feel a little bit insane to start a company like this?
Every day.
This was just in April. Dan, you lost quite a bit of weight since April.
Yeah, it's been a really gnarly year for me, to be honest. I had a health crisis this year, stress, eating wrong, not exercising enough, and I changed all those things, so I'm feeling a lot better.
Well, congratulations, but this is not good for continuity. So, I mean, if you could have postponed your weight loss till next year, that would have been great, but whatever, we'll deal with it. What is it, diet?
Diet, exercise, and stress reduction. When we started together, I'd come off selling my previous film technology company called Paralinx that made an HD transmitter, and we sold that to Vitek Group and Teradek. Some people, you know, when they sell a company, they want to buy a Ferrari or a Lamborghini or something, and I thought, my dream toy for myself is a set of anamorphic lenses. And, you know, both of us came from a DIY background building DIY anamorphic lenses. Forrest had started actually 3D printing optical resin and then trying to polish it from his own garage, which is admirable, pretty crazy, but admirable too.
I was using like
awesome.
wet and dry sandpaper to get the initial shape, you know, like 800 grit to 2000 grit, and then polishing it up from there. Literally like you would like an auto body project. But
For those that can't afford lenses, just start polishing some resin.
yeah, shout out to Smooth On.
One of my least favorite things about filming anamorphic in the past was what you actually pointed out as mumps.
With certain anamorphic lens designs, when you focus closer, you lose the anamorphic compression ratio. Anything that you're focusing close on becomes distorted, fatter.
So that's the mumps that you're talking
Yeah.
about right here, where my face just looks really wide. Will they ever try to correct the aspect ratio based on where the focus is?
At that time, they didn't have any visual computers that you could just click a couple of coefficients and go, oh, make that squeeze less. You'd have to use an optical system. And they tried to do a few things with different prisms, but you couldn't really use prism systems to correct a shot.
So then if I come back here, would this generally correct?
Yeah, let me rack to you. Much more flattering, but also like 15 feet away.
This is where Frank Sinatra was like, why do I look so fat?
Yeah, Frank Sinatra famously saw some dailies filmed with one of these lenses and said, no. We need some solution to this. Thankfully, at that time, Panavision had come up with their auto Panatar system, which actually does correct for that. This is a Panavision lens we're showing. This is an early auto Panatar lens, and it has 2 groups of cylindrical optics that counter-rotate to each other, and as you focus closer, they move more into position, and it squeezes the image more. So they've got the ratio of squeeze timed so that it always stays a 2x squeeze through the whole focus range. And that was unheard of, brilliant, and they patented it. Mr. Sinatra required in his contract that Panavision lenses be used to film his close-ups.
So that's something that is not corrected in all anamorphic lenses today, but all Atlas lenses have the mumps corrected.
That's correct. We made it a high priority to make sure that all the Atlas lenses that we put out have no mumps.
Another thing that's very common in anamorphics is not having a good minimum focus distance. Is that just a limitation with a lot of anamorphic lenses?
It's a balance and a compromise to get there, but one of the things that we try to do really with the Orion, and especially even with the Mercury, is to push these limits.
That's one of the things I did definitely notice when I was shooting with these lenses, was like, oh, I could actually get a real close-up, and without a diopter either.
Yeah, absolutely. So for those who don't know, a diopter is like eyeglasses or magnifying glass for your camera lens. Closer close focus, but you end up giving up your infinity focus.
All right, so going back to these lenses here, so this is the Orion. This is what you launched with, and this is what a majority of the current projects are using. And then you came out with a limited edition silver edition, which takes on a little bit more of the flare characteristics of the source, right? But another thing I thought was really interesting is that you mentioned that the through focus is different.
Through focus, so where is the picture sharpest? And then how does the beginning of the sharpness come in, and how does the end of the sharpness go out?
For example, in this shot here, let's say it's focused on you, it would 50-50 split would be that your focus would be right in the middle of the two. So it ramps into focus and then ramps out pretty evenly.
With the Orion Series Silver Edition, 60-40, around 60-40, 30-70. So like if we have Gene's eye in focus, it'll carry through to the back of his hair. If we're talking about really shallow depth of field, and then just at the tip of the nose would kind of start to fall off, but you'd have all the way through the hair and the ear and the back of Gene's head.
The sharpest point of focus doesn't necessarily have to be right there in the middle of the focus range.
That's something you do see with a lot of the Leica lenses that people attribute as 3D pop, but it also exists in some of the really awesome classic lenses like Baltars from Bosch and Lohm. Cooke Speed Panchros have that to an extent, and they also have something called field curvature, which is a quality of focus where the plane of focus is actually curved like a dish shape. So some lenses have really good center focus, and then the outsides fall off either towards the lens and focus is actually closer on the outside, or it becomes further. So there's positive field curvature and negative field curvature, and these are just attributes of any given lens.
Atlas lenses, are you looking for something flat, or are you going for a curvature? Or
with the Orions, we went for really flat field performance, so that was one of the design constraints. And then with Mercury, we wanted to add a little bit more field curvature, so your area of attention is more in the center, but you can generally hold people top and bottom and left and right. And there's barrel distortion, which, as the name implies, is shaped like a barrel, so it curves outward. And then there's pin cushion distortion, which curves inward. And generally, barrel distortion is more akin to human vision, and so oftentimes humans find barrel distortion more pleasing when they see it in a camera image.
you actually go for a little bit of barrel distortion?
As we say, lens design is compromise, and we can make the lenses larger and more expensive and heavier and flatten that distortion out, or we could make the distortion go the other direction and have pin cushion distortion. But we choose barrel distortion as our primary focus here because more people like that as an imperfection. It's more desirable. The opposite of distortion would be something we call rectilinear, and rectilinear just means that all straight lines are purely straight. We're sending a test pattern through the back of the lens out to the front. Some of the characteristics are reversed. You remember that those straight lines were curving the other way, and then when you're projecting it looks like pin cushion. But this is actually the same lens and the same fields that we're looking at. And you can see this has really good top and bottom performance, but in the far out left and right, it tends to curve out more and fall off. So that's a way of drawing people's attention more towards the center and the vertical center of the frame. So that's one of the design aesthetics of the Mercury that we chose to focus on. This is where we're doing 21 and 25 millimeter assembly in the clean room, inside the cleanish room. All the Orions are assembled here at Atlas HQ in Glendale.
Finally, the newest release, which is the Mercury lenses right here, full frame at a 1.5x squeeze ratio. So I'll go ahead and play the launch video here.
The first shot, they turn the lens 90 degrees to get that square anamorphic format.
So they actually take the camera put it on its side and then attach the lens normally.
I was trying to encourage him to do that because it keeps the traditional anamorphic flare being horizontal and your bokeh being vertical. But they took it a little more avant-garde in this case and just turned the lens. So you'll see in some of the shots from La Mer, there's a vertical streak flare.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, because the PL mount, you can attach it either way. It's not like a E mount or EF.
Yeah, that's another Atlas cool thing that we've done. So not every brand does this, but PL mount lens, there's 4 tabs in the corners, and each of those tabs on an Atlas lens has the notch cut in the center. And that lets you orient the lens in any direction.
Slide it on sideways, get vertical streaks.
Exactly.
And do all kinds of funky, unique, creative things with it. Again, this is 1.5x squeeze, but we still get quite a bit of that anamorphic characteristics.
Exactly. Part of the optical design was to have what we call enhanced bokeh. So when you're out of focus, your out of focus areas will actually stretch significantly more than you might expect.
Oh, look at that flare.
This is a warmer flare. It's
Straw, golden amber. So the first release of Mercury series consists of 3 focal lengths, and all of those have a T2.2 aperture. And then the next wave of Mercury lenses that are still in the same family will be a 54, a 95, and then should we just tell them what it's going to be today? I mean, we could give Gene an exclusive today.
Ah,
yeah, we'll put it in the video.
138 millimeter.
138 millimeter.
Yeah, in the pipeline we have a longer lens, the 138, and we also have a wider future lens that we'll announce sometime after that second Mercury wave. The list price is about $6,000, and then if you pre-order before March 31st, 2023, you get about $1,000 off per lens. The only downside is it's going to take a little while for the lenses to ship.
Time to start filling up that piggy bank. Now, wide anamorphics is not a thing that is very common, but you guys put out a 25 and a 21 for the Orions. Funny because it doesn't even sound necessarily that wide, but Orions are 2x, so we're talking about 10.5 basically on the Super 35.
Basically a fisheye anamorphic.
Yeah, I feel like the 25 gives you a really wide perspective, and 21, it kind of screams, I'm really wide. We have this split screen that you have on your website.
You have to be very intentional with how you use the 21. The 25, you could be a little more fast and loose with your composition because the geometric distortion is more controlled.
And I went to one of your talks where you kind of talked about the history of lenses, and that's interesting. Kind of seems like anamorphics were kind of created by accident.
So in the mid-50s, people stopped going out to the movie theater, and why do we think that is? Probably because a lot of people were happily satisfied at home watching a little square box and eating a microwave TV dinner, right? How can we do something that's immersive, exciting, and engaging?
So they created that huge, wide, wraparound, like immersive experience, but they used 3 cameras and 3 projectors.
People freaked out when they first saw Cinerama films. So anybody been to the Cinerama Dome in Hollywood? Yes, this is great. People are excited about it, but there's one crucial problem. We just spent 3 times the budget. What if we could use a regular camera and a regular projector and then just have one additional type of lens that would give us this wide angle horizontal field of view?
You mentioned something about a military device, was it?
Yeah,
What is it
Henri
called?
Chrétien, who's the French optician, he had developed an anamorphic viewfinder system for tanks in World War I, and that would allow them to have a field of view from a tank with a monocular eyepiece. You'd be able to see if there's people coming from the left or right side of the tank.
So the first anamorphic lenses were on tanks in the battlefield, and then they're like, well, we could take this and put this on this film camera.
This is an attachment that would go in the front of a regular lens. Compared to what your eye sees, you see twice as much this way, left and right. That solved some of the problems that they were facing, but it created other unintended consequences that became additional problems.
Oh, you look extra skinny. Oh, you look normal again.
And you'd have to focus a regular prime lens and this lens at the same time. So needless to say, camera assistants hated that. If you have it skewed off to the side, your picture is going to get all wonky. Made this lens, and you can focus with just one knob. Crazy thing about cameras at this time, they didn't even have a reflex viewfinder. So what the camera person operating the camera would see is through a goalpost. You'd use a parallax viewfinder, and you'd be looking at an approximation of what the lens is seeing, and you'd block your shot and run it, and then you'd rack the camera over into that position and do the same operation. This is the viewfinder attachment.
You would just look through this and be like, okay, this is generally
close
how.
enough.
So the fact that I can just throw these lenses on this camera and just see what my image is going to be on this little LCD, we're kind of
That's
spoiled
it.
here.
We're blessed. Yeah, it's a whole game changer. Anamorphic lenses in particular are technically imperfect, but creatively and artistically inspiring and interesting. And so that's why even today we still like to make and use anamorphic lenses.
Nerdy says, what's the curvature like with these? I've tried the Laowas lately and they curved inwards in the middle. What the f?
I believe our friend Nerdy is referring to the pin cushion distortion in the field, which means that the sides bend inwards. And to this point, and hopefully in the future, all Atlas lenses have barrel distortion, which is curving outward slightly.
You had mentioned there's even some that's like almost like a mustache shape.
Yeah, that's where the center could be barrel distortion and the outside could be pin cushion distortion. We like barrel distortion not only because vintage anamorphic lenses have it, but also because most human vision has some degree of barrel distortion.
It's interesting about anamorphics, it's like you're no longer looking for the perfect lens, you're looking for the right type of funkiness.
You're crate digging for the funky.
What's your guys' favorite anamorphic lens outside of Atlas lenses? Of course, that'd be cheating.
C series. Probably.
Panavision?
Yeah.
I am gonna go with a very specific lens, Panavision B series Auto Panatar 50mm.
I'm gonna act like I know what that is. Good choice.
The C series 40 is another favorite, but those are like, again, both of these lenses are unobtainium.
The cinema ratios are 235:1 and 239:1. Should I cut the sides off the image to fit in the cinema theater?
It's a great question. In the digital era like we are now, you are going to want to make that choice based on the way that you want to tell your story visually. There's no need to conform to old standards unless that's a requirement of your distributor.
What if we want to do just what the big movies are doing?
If you just want to do what the big movies are doing, crop it to 240. That's
240?
240, 239. Either of those are fine. 240 is easier mathematically.
Senpai in Japan says, can you vlog on these? I actually have.
Yeah,
on
you
the
did do that.
GH6, and it looked amazing. My arm almost fell off because the 21 is not necessarily a lightweight camera, but what I really like about the GH6 is that it has an anamorphic mode, so you can literally see it de-squeeze in the monitor, but it has a anamorphic stabilization mode where it actually gives you that IBIS stabilization, but it doesn't do the roll.
Oh, right.
What does this smell like?
Fun fact, metal doesn't have a smell. It's the reaction of your oils touching the metal that make it smell a certain way.
Oh, so it smells like your greasy hands is what it smells
That's what
like.
metal smells like, is it smells like whatever the oils and chemistry you're giving it.
So I guess that's true in the machine shop too. It's the machine oil.
Are there significant differences in working with anamorphic versus spherical lenses? I would say with a lot of them, yes. But that's one of the things I really appreciated about these Orions is that you can kind of just treat it like a normal lens. You still have a T2 aperture on the Orion. You get close minimum focus distance, so I didn't really find a need for diopters.
Even if you don't think you're gonna buy an Atlas lens, we would love to welcome you to our Glendale headquarters, Glendale, California. Every Wednesday, we do an in-person demonstration. You're welcome to bring your own camera. If you're a complete novice, you've never experienced anamorphic before, we really love that because it gives you a first hands-on experience. And if you're anywhere else in the world and you can't come visit us in Glendale, California, sign up for one of our virtual demos where you can direct us over Zoom, shoot the clips, and then we'll upload those to the cloud so you can have access to original camera master clips of the camera of your choice.
Yeah, that's what you guys do over there, right? That's why you got all those cameras set up. What do you have, a Alexa, a Red, a Venice? Well, thanks so much, guys, for allowing me to come here and play with these lenses. That is all for this video. Thank you so much for watching.
Come on down and visit us or join us on Zoom. We'd love to meet you.
Woo!